everyone. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. This is Jiwon. Welcome back to Understanding Korea, one story at a time. Before we dive in, a quick update on what's happening here. Last month, I started a new monthly series called K-Book Uncovered. The idea is simple. There are so many incredible Korean books that explain the soul of this country, but they haven't been translated into English yet. They are just sitting there, locked behind a language barrier. My goal is to unlock them for you. In our first episode last month, we looked at historian Kim Won's book on the June 1987 uprising, 87년 6월 항쟁, diving into the fiery, dramatic turning point that shaped modern democracy in Korea. This month, we are looking at something even bigger, a book that tries to explain the whole chaotic, messy, beautiful story of how modern Korea came to be. The book is My History of Contemporary Korea, 나의 한국 현대사 by Yu Min. Now, Yu Min isn't just an author. He's a character. He was a student activist who went to prison for fighting the dictatorship. He later became a politician, served as a government minister, and is now one of the most influential liberal intellectuals in Korea. He's basically lived through every major event we are going to talk about. If you've read this week's newsletter, you know we've started a special 4-part deep dive into this book. Even if you have read this week's newsletter, stick around because today I want to talk about the things I couldn't fit into the written version, the deeper philosophical insights that make this book so special. If you are listening to this while you're commuting, folding laundry, or maybe doom scrolling in bed, don't worry. I'm going to walk you through the book slowly as if we are sitting down over coffee and pulling out old photo albums together. So let's travel back to 1959. We started the newsletter with the image of Ground Zero. The year is 1959. The Korean War ended only 6 years ago. The GDP per capita is $81. Just take a moment to imagine that number, $81 a year. South Korea was poorer than most countries in the world at the time. It was absolute poverty. People weren't worried about democracy or human rights. They were worried about whether they would survive the winter. But here is a detail in the book that really struck me, which I didn't include in the text. Yu Min talks about this concept of refugee mentality. He says that in 1959, South Korea wasn't just poor. It was a refugee camp masquerading as a nation. Think about it. Millions of people were displaced. Families were separated. Everyone was a survivor. And Yu Min argues that this mentality, it never really went away. Even today, modern Korea is hyper-competitive. Everyone is rushing. There is this underlying anxiety that if you stop running, you die. Yu Min suggests this is a hereditary trauma. We are a nation that remembers in our DNA what it's like to have nothing. And here is the kicker that shocks a lot of my non-Korean friends. In 1959, if you were betting on which Korea would succeed, you would have bet on North Korea. Yu Min points out that during the Japanese colonial period, most of the industrial base, power plants, factories, mines was built in the north. The south, it was just the farmland. So for the leaders in the south, the fear wasn't just the starvation. It was the fear of losing the competition to the communists. It was an existential race for survival. Now, this desperate environment gave birth to what Yu Shimin calls the fraternal twins of modern Korea. This is the core metaphor of the book, and I want to unpack it a bit more here because it explains everything about Korean politics today. Yu Shimin says April 19 and May 16 were fraternal twins with the same father but different mothers. Let's meet the twins. The older brother was born in April 1960. This was the 419 revolution. Students and citizens rose up and toppled the corrupt first president Lee Seung-man. The older brother was idealistic. He shouted for dignity and freedom. He wanted a democratic republic, just like the Constitution promised. But he was young, inexperienced, and honestly, he couldn't put food on the table. The economy was still a mess. The younger brother was born just a year later, in May 1961. This was the 5/16 military coup led by General Park Chung-hee. The younger brother was ruthless. He didn't care about freedom. He rolled into Seoul with tanks and offered a different deal: rice and order. He represented the primal desire for survival. In the newsletter, I introduced them as rivals. But in the book, Yu Shimin does something really interesting. He uses Maslow's hierarchy of needs, explain why the Korean people accepted the younger brother's rule. You know Maslow's pyramid, right? At the bottom, you have physiological needs: food, water, sleep. Above that is safety, then love, esteem, and finally, at the top, self-actualization. Yu Shimin argues that younger brother, the dictators, the industrialization camp, they represented the bottom of the pyramid: physiological needs, rice, survival. The older brother, the democracy activists, they represented the top of the pyramid: self-actualization, dignity, freedom. The tragedy of 1960s Korea was that you can worry about self-actualization when you are starving to death. This is why the public tolerated the coup and the dictatorship for so long. It wasn't because they hated freedom. It was because they were stuck at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid, desperate to solve the problem of hunger first. And this brings me to the most powerful and frankly the most moving part of the book. It's about empathy. Remember, Yu Shimin is a liberal. He was tortured by the military regime. But in the preface of the book, he tries to answer a question that baffles many young Koreans and outside observers. Why do older Koreans, the ones who lived through the dictatorship, still vote for the conservative party? Why do they still support the legacy of the dictator? Usually, people dismiss it as brainwashing or ignorance. But Yu Shimin says no, it's not that simple. He says, I'm paraphrasing here, that for the elderly generation, voting for the Conservative Party is a way of validating their own lives. Think about it. They lived through hell. They ate tree bark to survive. They sacrificed everything, their youth, their freedom, to build those factories and highways under the younger brother's command. They lived through what Yu Shimin calls barracks state. If they admit that the dictatorship was purely evil or wrong, It feels like admitting that their entire life's work, their blood and sweat, was for nothing. It feels like denying their own existence. So when they vote for the legacy of Park Chung-hee, they aren't just voting for politician. They are voting to say, my life mattered, my suffering built this country. Yu Min calls this a history of desire. It's not about good guys versus bad guys. It's about the desire to be recognized for what you endured. I found that so profound. It changed how you look at those elderly protesters in downtown Seoul waving flags. They aren't just angry, they are desperate to be acknowledged. The history war between these two camps, the industrialization camp and democratization camp, is still going on today. You see it in every election. One side says, we built the economy. Without us, you'd be starving. The other side says, we won your freedom. Without us, you'd be slaves. But 유시미 concludes with a concept called limited pride, 제한적 자부심. He says, Korea is an ugly country, but it is also a beautiful country. It's ugly because it was built on violence, corruption, and ruthless competition. But it's beautiful because, well, look at us now. We went from $81 GDP to a cultural powerhouse. We went from military junta to a democracy that impeached the president peacefully. He writes, if you compare Korea to heaven, it is hell. But if you compare Korea in 2014 to Korea in 1959, it is a miracle. That is the nuance I want us to carry through this series. We aren't here to bash Korea, and we aren't here to blindly praise it. We are here to understand the cost of that miracle. Next week, we are going to explore the true cost of this miracle. We will talk about nation in uniform. But I'm not just talking about school uniforms or military drills. I'm talking about a society where the state tried to standardize not just how you dressed, but how you dreamed. You will see what happened when the desire for growth pushed people to their absolute limit. And we will meet a young man named Jeon Tae-il, a worker who refused to be a machine and lit a fire that is still burning today. If you enjoyed this deeper look into the psyche of modern Korea, I hope you will consider joining me for the rest of the journey. I create this podcast and my newsletter as two halves of a whole. The newsletter gives you the story, the facts, and the history. This podcast gives you the context, the emotion, and the why behind it all. They are designed to be enjoyed together. So, if you found today's story intriguing, please subscribe to my newsletter. You can join for free to get the main stories. But for those who want to go deeper, like exploring untranslated Korean books, such as the one we discussed today, I offer a paid membership. And just a quick heads up, I'm currently offering a special annual subscription discount that ends at the end of November. It's the best way to support my independent work and ensure you don't miss a single chapter of this series. Thank you for listening and thank you for reading. I will see you in the next chapter of our history. 오늘도 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 주에 만나요.